Welcome to 73 Mentors. I'm your co-host, Jason Vidaurri.
I'm your co-host, Vincent Vidaurri.
And here we are at 73 Mentors, diving into the 73 most influential people who have ever lived. Today we are in our fifth discussion of Karl Marx. And I guess I should say we're doing a countdown from 22 down to number 1. We started off with Plato at number 22. We've also talked about Galileo, number 21. And we're on Karl Marx, our number 20. And so we'll continue this. And in this one, we're going to be hitting Karl Marx's really the end of his life, his last 20 years or so, from about the years 1867 to about 1883 when he died. And we're going to be hitting one of his major works, Capital, and hitting some of a couple different parts of his life and his continued work and influence. We're also going to talk about where he was wrong and dive in that area. We're also going to do this thing like we did in our last episode, if you caught that, where Vincent's going to be taking the more pro-Marxist side, and I'll be taking the more pro-capital side. So we're going to throw it back and forth that way again. So let's get on with that.
All right. I thought a good place to start is I read this story recently about a gentleman, and I thought we'd just start there because there's a lot of interesting components to his life. So let me just start with the story. So Henry Charles Bukowski was an alcoholic, a womanizer, a chronic gambler, a lout, a cheapskate, a deadbeat, and on worst days, a poet. He's probably the last person on earth you would ever look to for life advice or expect to see on any sort of self-help book. Bukowski wanted to be a writer. But for decades, his work was rejected by almost every magazine, newspaper, journal, agent, and publisher he submitted to. His work was horrible, they said, crude, disgusting, depraved. And as the stacks of rejection slips piled up and the weight of his failures pushed him deep into an alcoholic-fueled depression that would follow him for most of his life, Bukowski had a day job as a letter filer at a post office. He got paid poorly and spent most of it on booze. He gambled away the rest at the racetrack. At night, he would drink alone and sometimes hammer out poetry on his beat-up old typewriter. Often he'd wake up on the floor, having passed out the night before. 30 years went by like this, most of it in a meaningless blur of alcohol, drugs, gambling, and prostitution. Then when Bukowski was 50, after a lifetime of failure and self-loathing, an editor at a small independent publishing house took a strange interest in him. The editor couldn't offer Bukowski much money or much promise of sales, but he had a weird affection for the drunk loser, so he decided to take a chance on him. It was the first real shot Bukowski had ever gotten, and he realized probably the only one he would ever get. Bukowski wrote back to the editor, "I have one of two choices, stay in the post office and go crazy, or stay out here and play a writer and starve. I have decided to starve." Upon signing the contract, Bukowski wrote his first novel in 3 weeks. It was called simply Post Office. It is dedicated, he wrote, dedicated to nobody. Bukowski would make it as a novelist and poet. He would go on and publish 6 novels and hundreds of poems, selling over 2 million copies of his books. His popularity defied everyone's expectations, particularly his own. Stories like Bukowski's are the bread and butter of our cultural narrative. Bukowski's life embodies the American dream, a man's fight for what he wants, never gives up, and eventually achieves his wildest dreams. It's practically a movie waiting to happen. We all look at stories like Bukowski's and say, see, he never gave up. He never stopped trying. He always believed in himself. He persisted against all odds and made something of himself. It is then strange that on Bukowski's tombstone, the epitaph reads, "Don't try." See, despite the book sales and the fame, Bukowski was a loser. He knew it, and his success stemmed not from some determination to be a winner, but from the fact that he knew he was a loser, accepted it, and then wrote honestly about it. He never tried to be anything other than what he was. The genius is Bukowski's work was not in overcoming unbelievable odds or developing himself into a shining literary light. It was the opposite. It was his simple ability to completely, unflinchingly honest with himself, especially the worst parts of himself, and to share his failings without hesitation or doubt. This is the real story of Bukowski's success. His comfort was himself as a failure. Bukowski didn't care about success. Even after his fame, he'd still show up to poetry readings hammered and verbally abuse people in the audience. He still exposed himself in public and tried to sleep with every woman he could find. Fame and success didn't make him a better person, nor was it to become a better person that he became a famous and successful. In a word, he was authentic. And reading this, I had this smile, is that here's a guy, and again, it's the ideal American story of down and out, if nothing else, it's the hero story. It's the down and out. He's year after year failing. He's stuck at a post office filing letters for 30 years. He's addicted to drugs. He's into prostitution. It's this worst of the worst. And then he finally gets his break and he rises, and you think, wow. And then all of a sudden you're thinking, yeah, he's going to become a better person. And he's like, no, he's just as worse as he ever was. So the only reason I thought of this story when we read Marx is that there's the best characteristic I think Marx has is he's unflappable, the dedication to his ideology. And Jason and I talked about this last episode, is he lost 3 of his children in a very short time period because of poverty. And yet he didn't change his course. Again, maybe he couldn't change his course, but it didn't seem that he gave any effort to change his course. And he continued to go spend a minimum of 8 to 10 hours in the library still on almost every day except Sundays. He never backed down from his belief in his ideology. And in this part of his life, so the last 20 years of his life, he still didn't back down. And he seemed entrenched. And in this part of his life, he loses another daughter and his wife. And you would think after all those losses that you would change course at least some way, somehow. And he never did. And if anything, he was so entrenched that he distanced himself from nearly anyone outside of his immediate family and Frederick Engels. I mean, he just, even people who were Marxists that would visit him, he just never, he didn't seem to need them or want them in his life. So when I bring up Bukowski, it just made me think of that, is that if there's nothing else, the redeeming factor of Karl Marx is he's authentic. He's authentically himself throughout his entire life. His ideology changed little from the time in his 20s to the time when he dies in his 60s. It got sharper, but it never fundamentally and foundationally, it never changed. So
yeah, no, I find that interesting. You bring up good points there, and I love that you brought that the whole story is about being authentic, because that's so prevalent in our society right now, right? Hey, be yourself, go do your thing, be authentic. And it throws in my mind, well, what does that mean? And who is, even when I look at myself and ask myself, well, who is Jason then? What part of Jason is authentically Jason? What part of Jason maybe I need to change? And I love how you bring that. Marx was like, it didn't seem like he had concerns about, especially in terms of his ideology, like you said, and so he wasn't going to change that. And then at the end of his life, and it seemed like he got, what I gathered in this last reading at the end of his life is that he seemed to grow tired of the arguments.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where even if people came and wanted to talk about even his ideas, he just like wasn't really into it, except for a certain group of if there was a young revolutionary that was really I guess upheld him really in high esteem, then it seemed like he was okay with those people. Well, even like the old friends that talk about Marx, it seemed like it was maybe a little bit burned out of that conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some part of it was he got tired of it, but I think to some degree, you think about it, he spent the better part of 40 years doing nothing but studying this.
Yeah.
So who is your equal? I think I'm not so sure it was tired as he was maybe bored with the individuals and maybe their poor grasp of what was really he was trying to tell them. I think that was part of it. I mean, you think about throughout the entire time, anyone who attempted to deviate from his perspective of what Marxism was, he immediately cast them out.
Yeah.
Even if it had slight shades of change, he just had no tolerance for that. And so, yeah, again, I think the word I'm thinking of, he was authentically entrenched. I mean, there was no movement or very little movement from where he was.
Do you see that as being one of the reasons why he was so influential? Is because that firmness for his whole life. Whereas another character that does say change their ideas over time, say, okay, yeah, I used to think this, but now I'm here. They just don't have that same authority. They don't have the same influence over long periods of time. Is that part of it?
I think so. I think it comes to several levels. One, the length of time he was dedicated to it. So he had a very focused dedication. Being that focused for that many years, the subtleties and nuances that he could present were, I'm sure, still unparalleled as far as political, if you want to call it political economic theory of the time. I don't know how many rivals he would have actually had. So I think you have those two components. Again, I find I admire that much dedication. I think there's something that most people, well, clearly his contemporaries, I mean, we could, only reading about him would we know his contemporaries. I think even Marxists probably wouldn't know, like Lassalle. They wouldn't know who Lassalle is.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I mean, I think most people would know who Frederick Engels was, but they probably wouldn't know how much Frederick Engels contributed to who Karl Marx became. I mean, I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. Well, some of the other influence he had here in his last years, we hit this a little bit last episode, but it was the International Workmen's Association, which actually started outside of him, but he became the head of it, a leader in it. And it was essentially that advocating for the rights of the workmen and pushing Marxist ideas. And here in the last part of life, we hit it last time where it seemed to rejuvenate Marx, and he felt like he had a purpose, a stronger purpose again, and had some rejuvenation and was excited about the work again. And several of the letters that he wrote to his friends reflected that idea. And I also found in our last thing here that it gained some teeth, I guess is the way I would say that, where this organization actually had some power within society. But it was short-lived. It seemed like it only lasted for a handful of years, and then it was disbanded by Karl Marx. I think he moved it to the United States. And then disbanded it. So, I thought it was an interesting part of his life where there was an organization there that started carrying some authority, really brought some light and activity into his life again, and then seemed to have some influence, but then was disbanded. So that was one of the interesting things I found.
It goes back to the point I think I was making earlier. I think it was disbanded, again, based off the reading. It seemed that he was disbanded because it wasn't following his ideals.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
It was drifting to something different. It was drifting to collaborating with what he would see as the enemy, the bourgeoisie or the government at the time. So and because he was leading it, I just didn't think it didn't have the purity that he was looking for. And so I think he thought of a nice, convenient way of exiting it. Like you said, he moved it from, at that time, the International Workmen's Association was all in Europe.
Yeah.
From what I could tell. So then he moves it to the United States, which there was no one in the United States, at least it wasn't mentioned in the reading, that represented him. So in a sense, it was a convenient way from him to disband it without saying it's disbanded. So
yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, so we have that influence. And I thought when we focus, obviously because we're in America, that we focus more on American politics, but I thought it was mentioning, Marx is obviously has an influence globally now. And so the place he was exiled for 30 years was London. So I was thinking, well, what has he contributed to London? I mean, he had at least to some degree to the British, to England itself. And to a large degree, he contributed what today would be considered the Labour Party in England. So to give you, again, high-level view of British politics, they do have a right, they do have a left. The left would be considered the Labour Party in England, and the right would be considered the Tories or the Conservatives, just like they are here, but they're called the Tories in England. So if anyone's keeping up with British politics this past week, they had the Brexit vote, whether to accept the Brexit that Theresa May, the Prime Minister Theresa May put together, or to reject it. And so they rejected it. And then they had a no confidence vote, which basically meant that they were determining whether Theresa May should continue as the Prime Minister or whether they should have a re-election. I only mention that to give you some background, in that the Labour Party is led by a gentleman named Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy Corbyn, I'm going to read a couple quotes from him here in a second about, he's talking to media, newspapers, journals, and digital media about where he's the leader of the Labour Party, where the Labour Party sits, and what they want to see happen within the media in England. So here's a quote by him. He says, quote, "The challenge of the movement I am proud to lead, whose aim is to transform society on behalf of the overwhelming majority, is to ensure technology, cultural, and economic changes empower people rather than oppress them." Again, he's the leader of the Labour Party, and you can hear a little bit of Marxism in there. As far as, they don't want, the new technology should be equal for everyone, and it should not be used to oppress people. And he goes on, quote, "The mission of socialism in the 21st century is to lead profound change so that it benefits the many, not the few." Again, you can hear Marxism there again, is that, who's benefiting from all these technologies? It's not the many. The many are being enslaved by them. The many are being exploited by them. And who's benefiting? The few, the select few. And this is how it ends. And one of the quote that I picked, it says, "A free press is essential in our democracy, but much of our press isn't very free at all. And as I'll lay out in a bit more detail, I want to see journalism and media workers set free to do their work, not held back by bosses, billionaire owners, or the state." Again, he's giving specific examples there of what would be the ruling class or the bourgeoisie, which is basically the bosses, the billionaire owners, and the state controlling the workers, controlling the laborers, the exploited. And this was presented to journalists, so that's why he pointed out journalists in this particular manner. But he said he wanted to set them free. The Labour Party, which again was founded on Marxism, basically wants to set the workers free from the bourgeoisie or those in control, those are in power. So that's Jeremy Corbyn, again, the leader of the Labour Party. And it's interesting to see, so again, he's on what we would consider the left, and on the right you have the Prime Minister Theresa May, who's part of the Tories or the Conservatives. And this is what she says about Corbyn, and it's kind of interesting. She says, quote, "His leadership of the Labour Party has been a betrayal of everything that party has stood for, a betrayal of the vast majority of MPs, and MPs are the ministers of parliament, members of parliament, sorry. MPs are members of parliament, and a betrayal of millions of decent and patriotic Labour voters. I look across the House and see backbench members who spent years serving the country in office in a Labour government. But I fear that today, this is simply not a party that many of its own MPs join." She added, "What he has done to his party is a national tragedy. Why he would do to the country would be a national calamity." So you can see even in British politics, you have those two sides, the idea of helping the labor, and those are helping what would be considered the bourgeoisie. So, and I think just as contentious as the U.S. politics are the British are just as contentious. If not more so.
No, it's so funny. You hear that, and it does sound very similar to some of the stuff we find in Marx and his thoughts. And I may have mentioned this before, Vince, but if I could push on that a little bit, and this concept of being oppressed, or being oppressed as a worker being oppressed. Now, I guess I consider myself a kind of a normal worker. I'm an engineer, but I go and work, and it's like a lot of us. But I don't feel like my life has been that of being oppressed. And I may have said this before, but I look at it, and if I think about I guess I'm thinking mostly financially, mostly with career. I look at that in my life, and I've been in my career for 20 years now. I guess my point. I'm not saying that I don't feel like people are out to get Jason or to hold me back. It seems like most of my limitations have been because of Jason, not because of any system or other people out there. So I guess in some say I hear that it doesn't resonate with me as much. I guess when I hear that, I'm like, okay, I understand there's some inequality and people are not always getting what's fair or what's right. But I think overwhelmingly, at least from my experience, it's not one of being, or at least my feeling is not one of being oppressed. Now, maybe I'm odd. I don't know if I'm odd in that sense, or most people do feel that, and I'm like an odd. Or maybe Karl Marx will say, "Hey, Jason, you bought into the system too much. The system has poisoned your mind.
You're delusional. You're living in an illusion." But if you think about it, is the only reason your employer has you around is that you're producing more for him. He's selling your commodity. He's selling you as a commodity. Let's make it easy. He's paying you $50,000 a year. Okay. So if he's paying you $50,000 a year and he's making $150,000 off of you because of the work you produce, that's what he's happy with. And if he keeps you happy enough by paying you $50,000 a year so you can stay around, you're healthy enough to stay around, you can procreate, then you produce more workers that are then just as delusional, thinking, "Oh, I don't feel oppressed." Well, yeah, I think the capitalistic system attempts to keep people in that state of mind that I'm not being exploited, because if they knew they were being exploited, then there would be revolutions, just like what Karl Marx is trying to have.
Yeah, I guess I see it more as a cooperation and an agreement between me and my employer, where if I could go make the same salary by myself, I would, but I can't. I don't have the tools and the ability to do it. Well, maybe the ability, but not all the tools that I need to do it. So I have an agreement with them. So I say, okay, I'll work for you. You pay me my $50,000 a year, and I'm okay. I understand that I have to produce more value than that. Otherwise, if you're paying me $50,000 a year and I'm doing $20,000 a year of value, see, that's a bad investment for them. I get that, and they'll lose money on me. So I guess part of me says I'm okay with that. And as I played with this exercise this week too, say, well, do I really want equality with my employer? I go, well, how about let me throw a few ideas and see how this plays out with Marx. Think about that, because we often think in terms of profits. Hey, this company's making all this money. Well, do I really want equality with them? How about when they lose money? My company's a large corporation. Some years it does lose money. So how about this idea? I want equality with that company when it makes money, but how about when it loses money? So at the end of the year, instead of me making money, they say, listen, we didn't have any profits this year at all. You don't get paid anything. Well, wait a minute now. That doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Or even worse than that. Hey, we lost money this year. Jason, you owe us money. You didn't get paid anything this year. Now you owe us money because we as a whole corporation, we lost together. So we all have to pay. Hey, this is equality. Equality for all of us. We're all in this together. And I myself don't like that idea. So I guess in part I'm saying, well, I kind of have an agreement where they can take some of that extra value I add to the company to keep the company going, to keep it profitable, to keep it creating the things that it needs to create. And I have this agreement, and it's okay. What's wrong with that?
Well, again, I don't disagree with it. It's just how much are you willing to give up? Let's just take, well, over the past 30 years, as an example. So the past 30 years, your difference in your pay to the CEO, or we'll call the C-suites, was about 30 times. So they made 30 times more than you. So for every dollar that you made, they made 30 times that. So, okay, that's still quite a bit of money. How about now you figure out that they're making 300 times more than you in the course of 30 years? Are you still okay with that? I mean, again, you're talking about, yeah, I know they have to make a profit off of me. Well, the profit is now being shifted to a very select few people, where you were, before it was distributed a little bit better. I mean, yeah, they're still making a profit, but not as much. Now, instead of, okay, our same scenario, instead of making, you know, they're paying you 50,000, but they're making 1.5 million off of you. Okay, now is that gap okay? Rather than before it was, let's just say 50,000, then you're, let's say 300,000. Okay, they were getting 150,000, distributing it amongst their executives and whoever else. Okay, that might be okay, but at what point do you say it's too much? At what point do you say that gap, or it doesn't matter, is because of the system we're under, there's no gap, or there's no multiple that's ever egregious?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, even asking how much value do I actually contribute to the company every year? Well, I can tell you, I probably contribute more now that I've been there a few years. When my first year, I probably cost them money, honestly, because I'm still learning the system, still learning how to be productive, figuring things out. I don't know. I guess I think about that. It's like, well, yeah, that it can happen. It can get extreme. And how do you find that line? I don't know. I guess my only comeback was like, well, then this is where I like robust competition. I have all, or at least competition and options, I guess, where it comes into play. Then it's like, okay, well, if this company's going to try exploiting to that degree, I can cease my agreement with them of being an employee and go for someone else that isn't doing that kind of thing. So maybe there's a little bit of, at least some check and balance with competition and options. That's, I guess, then it's like, okay, well then I guess that falls apart if you say, well, everybody's exploiting you, Jason. The whole system keeps exploiting you. You don't even, they all exploiting you to high levels.
Well, they are. I mean, in a sense, they are, because they're competing against each other, right? So they could. I mean, the 300, the C-suite who's getting 300 times more than you. You're moving to another company. They're still using that margin, I would think, because they're competing against you. It's not as if we're not in a system as if, okay, they're paying you 50,000 here. Oh, by the way, you can go across the street and you can make 1.5 million. It's like, wait a minute, no, because all this, again, the system is in itself is structured so that if you and I have competing companies, I might pay my workers a little bit more, but I'm not going to pay them 3 or 4 times the amount, because what does that do? That takes away from I mean, honestly, what do companies try doing? They try paying you the least amount possible to still keep you around. Why is that? So then they have bigger margins at the end of the day. They have bigger margins at the end of the day. Then they can give more bonuses to more people. They can make their shareholders a lot happier. So you're being exploited all the way around.
No, I get that. There's valid points in that, and that's really the appeal of Marx. I think he's right on a lot of the things he sees, and a lot of it's a critique on capitalism and the failures within capitalism and what it does. And I mean, yeah, there is some of that. I guess what I see as you move along his ideas is like, well, that side's true, but then what do you do about that? That's where I think it starts falling apart. It's like, well, what you envision to be the solution to these issues, I don't see as a solution at all. I think it actually gets worse if you try going down that road. We'll get down there. I just wanted to poke at that a little bit.
warm us up.
Warm us up a little bit. But I did want to hit on I guess pushing on Karl Marx and some of his ideas. And this is not totally new. We talked about this concept with Galileo, that even his whole life was dedicated into the science, into astronomy and understanding movements and planets, but he was still wrong on one of his major theories at the end of his life. And was about the tides and how the ocean tides work. Well, to not be a stranger, Karl Marx has actually missed on a few points right in his very area of expertise. I guess the first one I'll just hit is that he never saw the whole movement in Russia coming. In fact, a lot of his writings were kind of against Russia. They're too primitive. They're too primitive to be able to take the step into this more communist place. But here and later in his life, he started changing his mind because he had these young revolutionaries coming to him, and the movements were happening within Russia during this time to move that way. And he started changing his mind. I just thought it was interesting to look at that and say, oh, look at, you totally missed it. You totally missed it. For someone, like you said, studying every day in the library for his whole life on a certain subject and topic, and something has happened right in your lifetime you never saw coming. It blows me away. It's like you have these guys that are, and we're talking about the most influential people in the world that have ever lived. They're still missing things in their very area of expertise. It just blows me away.
Well, yeah, I think our experience reading about Galileo and now reading about Marx, I mean, the takeaway here is don't be a prognosticator. That's just, it doesn't work out well for the most part. I mean,
well, maybe it's also this, Vince, is like when you're in an area like that, such an expertise, and you're pushing the limits of understanding, you're bound to be wrong sometimes. You're out there living, you're pushing on the edges. You're not going to be right on every single thing. It just,
yeah.
Maybe if you're right on everything, you're probably playing it too safe, right? It's like if you're living your life and you never have any troubles and never have any problems, you never, well, you really, what is that saying? Oh, it's like that. I think I've heard that before, where someone talked about going to a bank and asking for money. And they said, every time I went to a bank and I've asked for money, they've always given me it. And their trainer, their coach hits them upside the head and said, well, you idiot, you weren't asking for enough money then. You've never asked for enough money then. You've never been rejected. Kind of like, we haven't pushed the limits. You haven't pushed the edge enough yet to see. Maybe that's part of it.
No, I agree. No, I did find it fascinating, though, is that this part of his life where he was incorrect, but he changed his course. I mean, before I said he didn't change it very much, but he did change his ideas for Russia. I mean, he didn't change the fundamentals of Marxism. He just changed that he was more open to the Russian people and their ability to carry out his ideas of Marxism. And even at this time, so we're probably in his late 50s, and he doesn't know Russian. And he takes up Russian in order to learn it so they could read their history and to read their literature in order to understand Russians better. And I thought that's a lesson to us, is that even that late in life, he's still willing to delve into something that had to be at least somewhat difficult.
Yeah, he apparently did it in 6 months.
Yeah, he did it in 6 months.
Learned Russian in 6 months. I'm like, gee.
He learned it in 6 months, and he learned it to such a degree that he was reading basically what would become critical analysis of the society. So, I mean, that's being very proficient at Russian within a very short time.
And it sounds like you also got to like some of their literature. There's their famous literature and stuff in Russian too. Yeah, that's. I saw that. I'm like, man, that again attests to Marx's intellectual capability. I mean, he was up there. Yeah.
And I guess the only thing I'd like to add to that is that every year, according to some biographers, every year he'd go through his works to refresh himself so that he would know, okay, I understand that. And he would do that routinely. So even though he had written most of it or knew most of it, he would still routinely go through it to keep his mind sharp and keep him focused on what he had done and continue to move forward and develop a new idea. So I thought that was fascinating and kind of a lesson to us that even if we know material really well, continue to revisit it and let it seep in.
And I'll push on another one. I'm saying that Marx failed, or it was an error in. And this comes out of Capital. But basically, he says this: while there's a progressive diminution in the number of capitalists, there's also a corresponding increase in mass poverty, enslavement, degeneration, and exploitation. And so the note I made here, I'm like, okay, Marx, you're saying with capitalism keeps going, you're going to have an increase in mass poverty, enslavement, degeneration, and exploitation. But I look at the last 150 years, And I said those things, well, I'm not saying those things haven't existed and haven't happened in areas, but by all measurements you could probably do on any of those scales for poverty, exploitation, enslavement, those will all actually decreased under capitalism over the last 150 years. So I put a question mark. Okay, Marx, what do you have to say about that then? How is the system that you said was so corrupt going to do all these terrible things, and it has done actually the opposite of those things?
Yeah, and I think one argument is that it hasn't run its full circle yet. It hasn't. I think Marx expected it to be quicker than it did, but you can look at our times, and along with that is this expansion of capitalism. So we're entering a time where in the past 20 years, it's been globalized. So now you and I are competing in a sense for resources on the other side of the world that wasn't necessarily there at his time. But I think what he did get right and predicted right, I'll get to your question, is that over time, the power has moved to fewer and fewer people, relatively speaking. So this idea of mass poverty and this enslavement, I think if you really look at it, I think it's coming, or has come, because you think the number of, let's just say the number of craftsmen or the number of individual craftsmen over the past 150 years has dwindled significantly. So now the vast majority of people are, if you want, enslaved to a company or corporation. I mean, that's part of the enslavement. Poverty, I think that would be a hard argument to make. I think that our everyday resources are probably more available now than they were at that time. But over time, I think what we're seeing is that these bigger and bigger companies, we mentioned some of them before, example is Amazon, Google. These are not just US companies anymore. These are international companies that have a lot of influence. It's all even an example of how much influence is. An article I was reading this past week about Amazon is that Amazon, if people who don't know, historically what it started out as the bookseller. And so it connected consumers with producers of books. Well, in the past 5 years, what they started doing is they started producing their own books. They became a publisher. Oh, wait a minute. Now you have the search engine that you're looking for books being a publisher. So what would you think could happen at that point? Is when you search for a particular romance, well, who's the first ones that comes up? They're Amazon published romances. So it's actually not destroyed, but significantly hampered some publishing companies and some writers, because they're not being published by Amazon anymore. And romance is an example. I think that I read that the vast majority of the top, I'm going to say 20 or 50 romance novels that you can find on Amazon are from Amazon publishers. And it's very hard to find anyone else.
I'll have to watch where I get my romance novels from here.
That's right. Right. You're being filtered. It's being filtered. But I mean, that's a small example of a very small select group of people now influencing. I mean, if they do have the majority of the publishing market in the United States for sure, the distribution market in the United States. So now you are reading maybe what you think you're looking for, but actually what they want you to find. So again, that's that's authoritative, if you will, controlling or oppressing or diminishing the liberties of the consumer. So back to you about Marx, is that I think what he said, I think he expected to occur more quickly, but I think you're starting to see some of those ramifications happen now. Larger and larger companies have more and more influence. And some of the companies, I mean, if you and I wanted to start, you and I couldn't start an Amazon business right now because there's so many regulations that the government has put in place. So again, this is what Marx was talking about, is that now you have large corporations and governments in bed together, and they make it nearly impossible for we're talking about a truly capitalistic system. How can new competition come into play when you don't have you may have the idea, but you don't have the capital, the resources to dedicate to make sure you're checking all these boxes that the government's put in place. You just don't have it. So you basically eliminated competition in that regard, because these two are together now.
You make me laugh on that, because I was actually one of my, because part of this approach for our audience, and some of you probably are familiar with this, but part of Plato's approach was, hey, when you're making an argument about, one side of a topic or not, the best approach is, hey, make the counter argument and make it better than the person that's even challenged you with that argument. Make it as best as you can, and then go and address it. And also the process that Vince and I are going through right now is basically trying to have that kind of conversation where we push on the edges of the ideas, and for the sole purpose that at the end of the day we come to a better understanding. So in my process of doing that, I actually threw that out there, Vince. I was like, if you haven't heard, Amazon is making their second headquarters, and they went through this whole bidding process with all the cities in it's the United States primarily, and all the cities are trying to bring them in and and I know a couple of cities here in Texas. Austin was a big one that was in there. Houston wasn't, but I followed some of that along the way. Well, guess where they chose to go? Their second headquarters. The big shocking news, right near Washington D.C. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? I want to go where the lawmakers are. So I was throwing that. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting, because is Washington D.C. really the best place for that kind of technology and having because it's always we want to have good colleges around there so we get good people into the company, those type of arguments. I'm like, I don't know. It sounds to me like you want to be where the lawmakers are so you can talk to them more easily.
Yep.
Oh shoot.
Yep. So that's where we're going to talk about some of his writings now and some of his works. So during this time period, he wrote a book. It ended up being four volumes, I believe, but he only wrote the first volume when he was alive. After he died, it's called Das Kapital. Das Kapital Volume 1 is actually what Karl Marx wrote. All the subsequent volumes were compiled and put together by Friedrich Engels. After post-mortem, he put those together. So, and this was written in 1867. So you can see, again, the time period that we're talking about, 1867 to 1883 when he dies. This launched him. So when he became president of the International, kind of launched him into kind of this international buzz, and he took on a second life, because if you recall, for about 10 years, he was just really obscure. No one really knew about him. And then in 1863, he became the leader of International Workmen's Association. That kind of launched him in international recognition. And then in 1867, after Das Kapital, I think it put him into another sphere of influence that was even higher. And Das Kapital, Marx, I think, would say it was a political theory treatise, but it also had a lot of history, a lot of criticism, and some, lack of a better word, some propaganda as to what Marxist was, and not Marxism, why the social economic system exists like it does. So I'm going to read one quote, at least from we're reading a book, Karl Marx, by Isaiah Berlin, and this is what he says about, or this is one of the things he points out within Das Kapital. He says, quote, "A day's work by a laborer may well produce an object possessing a value greater than the value of the minimum quantity of commodities which he needs for his own support. He thus produces something worth more in the market than what he can consume. Indeed, unless he did so, his master would have no economic reason for employing him." So this is back to what Jason was saying. Is that what's the plight of the laborer? The plight of the laborer is that he's working for a master. That master is getting more commodity, if you will, more value of a commodity out of Jason than or me or any labor than he would putting into him. But which makes sense is that, you know, as a capitalist or as a master or a business owner, you're only hiring people because they're producing more commodities that you can sell into the market for a higher price than what you're paying them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a business. So, I mean, Karl Marx just mentions this to give you an idea of where the laborer sits and what he's producing. He's producing widgets or whatever, some type of commodity for a fraction of the price that it's going to be sold on. And he's producing more than he needs. So if Jason and I need a widget or anyone needs a widget, yeah, you can go in there for 15 minutes to produce a widget, but you're there for 8 hours producing widgets. Well, what are you going to do with all those extra widgets? You're going to sell them on the market. And so the point of Karl Marx is saying is not only you're the master, but you're producing more than what you need.
I don't know what, I mean, I like I said, I think that a lot of this, you kind of question yourself, what resonates right about Marx? It's like, yeah, I think he's able to look at society, look at capitalism, and point out, hey, here's all the flaws, here's all the weaknesses of it, here's where things aren't as right as they could be. And I think he does a pretty good job of that. It's like, there is that. Okay, that's true. Yeah, I get that. So that's where I'm kind of sitting with his thoughts right there.
I think what resonates with, I think we talked about this a little bit, but he resonates with a lot of people because it's there. I mean, for the vast majority of people, we work for a company or a person. And because of that, I think it's easy to see the class distinctions that exist in the U.S. And throughout the world, there's a class distinctions. Now the argument becomes: is that necessary? Is it too egregious? You know, what's the gap that can exist? And to a large degree, Karl Marx addresses that in a very accessible manner. That's I think his benefit is it's accessible. It's very apparent, and he gives a reason for the status of the laborer and why he is where he is.
Yeah, and I guess maybe we'll get into this a little bit. Some of the criticism I get on there is like, yeah, I get that, but then where you go on the other side of that, I think fundamentally, at the base of it, at least in my perspective, is that he's missing the human, the real human element that comes into play here. We hit this before a little bit, I think, our last discussion. And maybe we'll get to it, because I think we're coming up on a quote here from Marx, and I think that kind of lays out the foundation of where it sits in. Because I think we're a little bit off on our previous discussion and talk about this equality and pushing this all down to this equal level. And that's not quite where Karl Marx is going. I'm missing that quote right now, Vince. I don't know if we have that.
Yeah, I have it. It's right here. So
Okay.
It says, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs.
Okay.
So for each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. So it's basically saying, and I think we did misrepresent it a little bit, is that, you know, if we use the same scenario that we had last time, if you were able to produce much more than I was because of your abilities, you would only get what you need. Anything in excess would come to someone else, to me or to someone else who needs that excess. So let's go back to the widgets. If you only need one widget a day and you're able to produce 10, but I wasn't even able to produce one for whatever reason, then one of your widgets would come to me. You would get one, I'd get one, and then the other 8 widgets would be distributed to those who were not able to produce their widget for the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I found the same quote here. So, well, one of my thoughts on this, to me, you're asking the basic human to do something different than would be natural for us. And it almost feels unfair at a certain level. So say I'm a really good producer. I produce $1 million into the society every year, but I only need $50,000 to live a basic living. And it's fair that I do that for my whole life. Where my neighbor down the street, he produces $10,000 worth of value, but he's taken, say, needs $150,000 because he has a big family. That's how it's going to work, and I'm going to be okay with that. I look at that, I'm like, that's not. You're asking the human to do something that you almost say that feels unjust. It's like, wait a minute, I'm doing all this value for society. Unless you have something overriding, like an incredible love and compassion for each other, which we struggle with as humans. We do care about each other, but we also care about ourselves and our own well-being. I'll share this. I'll share this to maybe illustrate this point a little bit better. I looked it up in as an illustration of this basic desire. Because when I hear that saying from him, say it again. I don't have my quote before me.
Sure. From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs.
Well, I hear that, and it comes to, I always think, well, gosh, if I could, what would I want? Well, I would like to work less and earn more. That's according to my needs, and I think that's pretty universal. So I looked up in 2016 statistics, and I thought, well, how many people play the lottery? Because that's what is someone when they're playing the lottery? I think most people are in that place. At least the people I've talked to. What would you do if you win? Well, I would work less and I would earn more. That's what they're basically saying. I said in 2016, and this is a U.S. statistic, and we spent. This is just on lottery. It's not even all the different forms of gambling. This is lottery only. U.S. citizens spent $72 billion on lottery. That came out to about $223 per person across the whole United States. To put that in a little bit of perspective, because I'm like, well, what's $72 billion? Well, in that same year, we only spent around $19 billion on NASA, or the space program. So we spent 4 times more on lottery than we did on the space program. And I think to me, it reflects that basic thing. I want to earn more, or I want to earn more and work less. And I look at that and I put that in Marx's society, or his idea. I look at that phrase and I'm like, well, shoot, if I'm the one getting to decide how much I need more than I'm getting right now. And I want to contribute less to society because that's work.
Yeah.
And then if we all do that, then there's it all falls apart.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see where you're coming from. But I think you always take the position, or you've taken the position, that you are the one that's overproducing. But how about if you were the one that, no matter, given your abilities, that you could only produce $10,000 a year? Why is someone else is producing $500,000 a year? Would you be okay with them giving you $40,000 to get you to $50,000, just like everyone else? And I think that's his point, is that the mass of people, the laborers, are making $10,000 a year. It's only the very few in the United States now, the very few who are making now 1.5, 2, 10, 20, $50 million a year. So do they really need $50 million a year? Can they not help those who are making $10,000 get up to the $50,000 a year? So again, I think it's a matter of numbers, is that the vast majority of people aren't making the huge amount of money. So when he's saying the needs, he's saying that according to the abilities, well, each according to his abilities, he's saying more or less, there's a few of you out there who are taking the vast majority of the income or economic advantages that the rest of us, or the rest of the people, do not.
Yeah. Well, let me share a story then. I'll share some story here. So there's a boy. He was his father was a prominent lawyer. His mom was a teacher for a time, and he had an older sister and a younger sister. Pretty intelligent boy, and grew up playing board games and being competitive. Was really good in math, but kind of got in a lot of trouble because he was kind of bored with things. So his parents, to help him out, put him in scouts and other things, trying to keep him occupied. As he got a little older, they put him in a preparatory school that would hopefully, challenge him some more. And there he made some good friends, and he got introduced to the computer. So this was happening back in the 70s, or actually 60s, 70s, when computers, there weren't home computers at the time. This was a time when a company had a computer, or in his case, a school had a computer. And so he got to play around with computers, really fascinated by it, and started learning about it, and actually did some programming on that computer. And I think his first thing that he wrote was a tic-tac-toe game back in the day. And this is all text computing. So most of you out there, especially the younger ones, have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, computer, what? Don't they all have screens and videos and stuff? No, this was just a text thing. Well, for a time he did that, and eventually graduated high school and went off to college, and was planning to study and be a lawyer just like his father. And about that time, this is in 1974, Altair computer came out. And because of his programming background and his friend from preparatory school that he had, he wrote to this company and said, "Hey, we can write a basic program for this computer you have." And they said, "Okay, let's see it." And he hadn't even been writing yet, but within several months, he put it together and they showed it to him, and it actually worked. And out of that, he formed a company. Dropped out of the university, and happened to be Harvard University that he was going to. Dropped out of that and started building this company. It started going well. Really went well in 1980 when IBM decided to work with them, and they did the MS-DOS system with them. And then in 1985, this company created Windows. And of course, I'm talking about Bill Gates and Microsoft. Someone that grew up from, I think his family was pretty well to do. I mean, his dad was a prominent lawyer. Certainly wasn't coming from the lower class, I'm sharing some of this and then to say what's gone on from then. So Microsoft became this huge company. Bill Gates is one of the most wealthy people in the world, up there with him. We've talked a lot about Bezos here recently in our podcast. Bill Gates is right there. And so if you don't know, he's been out of Microsoft, not running the company for some time, and has been doing a lot of philanthropic work around the world. And at this point, they started the Gates Foundation in 2000. So at this point, this recording in early 2019 looks like they've done about $40 billion of charity work through that organization. And so one of those, and I was looking at, well, where did some of this go? Well, some of it's going to eradicate malaria, polio, getting fresh water to people, getting medical supplies. And this other company did a statistic on one of the things that this organization did in getting these medical supplies. They said the Gates Foundation did $10 billion worth in this, helping people get supplies. And they've estimated because of that $10 billion, it's created another $200 billion of social and economic benefit for people. And so I share this. It's like, well, yeah, Bill, he makes way too much money. There's a couple concepts here. One is the concept of what is wealth? What is money? What does it do? We get this weird idea. This guy's really rich, like as if he's sitting on a big pile of gold in his basement and just laughing at everybody else. Well, in most cases, that's not it. That wealth is doing something out in society. It's invested in some other company. It's invested in people trying to make more wealth out of it. In the case with the Gates Foundation, they've been able to do literally hundreds of billions of dollars of benefit around the world. And so I guess I try to look at that a little bit more humbly and say, well, and instead of being so critical, I say, well, he made too much money than he should have. That's just exploitation he took from other people. But how many of us can say at the end of our lives that I really did a lot of work that literally made billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of benefit for people, where I got nothing in return for it? And I just put that out there as maybe a different perspective on wealth and what it does and how it can be beneficial. And that the person who's gaining the wealth is not the one that's benefiting from it. I think that's a real world, real something going on, instead of just us thinking, oh, Jeff Bezos, he's worth 100 and whatever it is now, $30 billion. That's too much. How can he be worth that much? We got to take that away from him and give it to other people who need it more.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. I guess a couple things come to mind. One is that could he have not, again, generating that wealth? Now we're at the end. I mean, he's at the end of his career. You know, once he stepped away from Microsoft, he's at the end of his career, obviously. But along the way, he was at the helm of Microsoft for well over, I think it's close to 25, 30 years. All the people that he employed, could he have not given him more during that time and had a similar, if not better, impact? I mean, I think you can put that argument forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to judge, right? Because like most of that wealth came because he was owner of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it seems like if you start the company, you're owner of it, and it grows and becomes really valuable because you made something really valuable for society, whether it's a product or a service. Same with Amazon. Now they say, well, I didn't really make that. So the value increased. So my wealth increased. I don't know. Who decides those things? I always come to this place. Well, then who makes that decision? Yeah. Who decides what is too much? We as a whole say, hey, wait a minute now. Once you're worth over $5 million, you have too much money, and we take that away. The other thing, you also make the argument, well, you said, yeah, maybe he should have paid his people more. Well, if he had done nothing, there would have been no Microsoft at all to pay any people anything. So doesn't he deserve some of that reward? He created that. He helped create that. He was a founder of it. He did. Lots of times to me, as it comes in this matter of lines, well, to what degree? To what degree is too much? What degree should he have paid his people? Well, I don't know. How much were they making? Maybe they're making the most out of any other programmers at the time. Well, that's still not enough because his company was making so much more money. Well, okay. I don't know.
It's an interesting question. Yeah. Well, I was in the Northwest for a while, and I can tell you, the people I talked to, Microsoft did not pay the best.
No. Okay, well, we know that.
All the companies. And the reason they didn't is because their position was, if you work for Microsoft, you can use that to launch your career into other areas. So we're going to pay you significantly less. It's an honor to work for Microsoft. So you should be willing to take a pay cut. But
then people did, though. See, the people of their own free choice did that because they knew that would benefit them in the long run, or at least they thought it would.
Yeah, they thought it would. Yeah. So, yeah. But I guess, I mean, there's that aspect of it, but there's also the aspect of we're getting into a situation, and we have been in the United States for a long time, in the West for a long time, is that with the ideal or the expectation of consumption. Microsoft only exists Microsoft only benefited companies because they thought they needed their product in order to compete against other companies. Then you get Microsoft 1, 2, 3, 4, and every year they're updating Microsoft, and you have to buy the latest thing in order to continue to go. So you can continue to consume. We'll go back to Plato. Is that the good life? Is the consumption a good life? I'd probably say no, in that we continue to do this, despite all the apparent goods that Microsoft has brought to the world. Did it not also set up this false expectation that if you have this computer program, or if you have this home computer, that your life would be that much better? And even in our lifetime, you see, we didn't have computers at home. Now everyone has a computer at home. Is our life that much better as far as leading a good life than 20, 30 years ago? I think people can make the argument that it probably isn't. Or if it's not, it's probably the same. So we get into this weird area where, again, according to Marx, is that the capitalism is basically this keep forcing us, or wouldn't exist or couldn't exist for very long unless we consumed. we're producers and consumers. That's what Marx was mostly concerned about. He was mostly concerned about the producer, but then he was also concerned to some degree about you're producing so many widgets. Again, we go back to the widgets. You're producing 10. I'm consuming one. You're consuming one. Where does the other 8 go? Well, they go to other people. Well, they don't really need the widget, but they're going to buy it because it's out there. We're convincing them to buy it. So that's where we're coming. Again, I see what you're saying with Bill Gates is that, okay, he created all this wealth, and now he's through philanthropic endeavors is helping all these other people. Is that the good life? I don't know. I would almost say no. I don't know.
Well, you remind me of we go back to our number 22 Plato, like we said, and you tap into the same question. It really raises this question here: is that how come Plato is still relevant? The questions in his talking, how is it still relevant after 2,400 years? And I think it is because that the basic human, and this is where I think Marx is going wrong on some of his understanding of the basic human. I don't think the basic human has changed that much. We still struggle with the same things. We still struggle with how do I create the good life for myself? I think capitalism does. It gives us an outlet where we think we can fulfill that need by consumption, by producing and consumption, like you're talking about, and it seems to accelerate that. And I think it's right in that we don't feel more fulfilled. We don't feel that good life by now having a computer now versus 30 years when we didn't. By having 2 cars where 50 years ago we may have had one. That doesn't seem to be. But I think Marx misses that point as well, and thinking that, to me, that the society that it looks like he's trying to create, that the human will be able to function within that. Because you talk about this, we have this concept, and I don't know where this comes from in humans, this idea of progress. We keep on pushing limits and trying to find out new things and progress to new levels. That's not just of capitalism, that's of human experience. Before capitalism ever came around, we were doing that, trying to find out new ways of living, coming in, from going from a hunter-gatherers to farming. Why do we do that? Well, we did it because we could produce better for ourselves. There's a better, at least we thought there was a progress made. If I can produce all my food by being a farmer and not having to hunt and gather, I had less unpredictability, perhaps more stability. Then you start getting to specialization. Well, hey, if Joe makes all the shoes and I do the farming, he can sell his shoes and I'll sell him some food for farming. And then specializations and stuff started happening, so we could thereby utilize the strengths of each other to better our society. So it's been on this concept of progress now. Are we really progressing in fundamental human ways that make us feel more that we're living the good life, that this is more meaningful? Perhaps not, but I don't know if that's, to me, the systems of the economics, the political systems are part of that, but they're not that feels so much internal to me. And maybe that's because of my religious background and my upbringing, but that feels like that's fundamental to it's core, and it's lots of times society doesn't say anything about that, or our education doesn't say exactly how should Jason be as a person? What kind of things should I do in terms of goodness for the world versus, it almost goes back to your starting thing, Vince. Who's authentically Jason, and who should he be? Should I have to change it all to better myself, so that therefore I better society? Well, if I follow the example of what's your name, the guy?
Bukowski.
Bukowski. No, I womanize and booze my whole life, and that's who I am. And he still produced something of value, right? Being authentic himself.
Yeah.
Those are hard questions.
No, they are. And I guess in defense of Marxism is that I think he did see that. I mean, I think that's the whole point of what he was trying to do, is that this idea of industrialism, this idea of the bourgeoisie was leading, it was progressing. Again, I go back to Hegel. It was progressing, and he just saw that as, yes, it's one of the stops along this progression of humanity to get to a good life, but it's not the destination. And so I think he was just making everyone aware, and to making everyone aware, and to some degree trying to instigate revolutions to propel humanity past this idea of capitalism to idea of socialism, and ultimately to ideal of communism as he saw it, as a classless existence of humanity. Now, yeah, I think that's the progression he was seeing, he was hoping for, and he was writing about. Are there some, again, I think there are some gaps in there, but I think he did, I don't foresee, or I don't envision him missing out on the human part, meaning that he was still trying to get to where Plato was, is that he was trying to get to what is the good life. Is the good life, again, is the good life you and I living in a factory producing widgets for 10 hours a day in order for us to subsist and to feed our family, and then do that 6 days a week? And I think for Marx, it was a resounding no. This isn't getting you, this is only a temporary point to get us to a social point, and a socialistic point, and ultimately to a communistic point. So I think that's why he was pointing out the evils of capitalism in order for that evolution, that progress to happen more quickly. Yeah, I keep seeing that. Every time I read it, the same themes keep coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, well, here's another area that I question the foundation of it, because I do maybe you're right on that. He does see that, but to me, he sees the system, the government, the economic system, that's going to help change the human. And to me, he overstates on how much that's going to change the human, the individual. And I bring that because, this is an argument that goes back all the way to Aristotle. This concept of, I guess we hear it in terms of nature versus nurture, right? How much do we change? How much art is in us already? Concepts of tabula rasa is the one I think of, that this blank slate. We come into as humans as a blank slate from birth, and we're only become what we're programmed from our upbringing, from society. And that concept's been around forever. Like I said, Aristotle, then also in the 1600s, John Locke and some of his philosophy had that. Other philosopher, Rousseau, in the 1700s had that. And to me, Marx reflects some of that. It's like, okay, I just need to change the society. I need to change the system around these people, and it'll be better. It'll be the better thing. And it's hard for me to see, because I guess it comes to this concept that the human's imperfect. We seem to acknowledge that, I think, pretty universally. I'm imperfect. My neighbor's imperfect. I have not seen imperfection in people in terms of we do bad things, we do wrong things, and that's going to keep happening. And so maybe we have these concepts of progress as well. It's like, well, I come to this like, well, we're not going to progress. Whatever system, no matter what system it is, it's not going to be perfect, because the individual units are not perfect. And when I look at the Marx ideas and where he wants to go, it's like, man, you're asking for a lot from the individual to be able to work in that society. I don't see just changing the structure of society that's going to change the individual, because we haven't seen it in history yet. You look at history and all the different systems that happen, and to me, that's why Plato's so relevant. It's because that basic human we still struggle with the same things. The systems have changed over time, but the basic human hasn't. So maybe that's my argument, is that the work that we need to be doing today is the basic human. How do we become a better basic human? Is it just the systems around us? Maybe not. Maybe that's not the full answer. Maybe there's something else that has to, other things that we have to do. I don't know what that is. I mean, religion was part of that answer, right? That has, over the years, that's been part of it. Hey, you had to become a better person, a more whatever the religion might be, more godlike, more good person, a more caring person. I don't know. That's where I feel like it misses sometimes. It's like, well, but and I think in reality it hasn't worked. The times it has been tried, it's never gotten there.
And I would say that yeah, yes, I agree. I see that. I see what you're saying. But I would also say that capitalism has done nothing to answer that any better either.
Yeah, probably not.
It's like, okay, to become a better person, it doesn't answer those. It doesn't answer those fundamental questions. It just says, consume, produce, consume, produce, consume. I mean, that's what it's built off of. It doesn't say to become a better person, you need to do, or it doesn't answer those fundamental questions. So yeah, maybe Marx is off on that point, but I think capitalism is off just as much. And again, I don't think Marx missed it, is that he just was thinking capitalism isn't going to make us any more human. Again, because he didn't, even as a Jew, he was never a practicing Jew. He didn't have religion in his life. So you have to come to it from a point of being irreligious. In industrial revolution, what do you have? You only have the system. The system is the only thing that's going to make someone more whole or more human. It's the only thing you have to work with. And I think he just recognized that as the industrialist got a hold of more and more people and enslaved them and exploited them, it didn't allow them to be more human. So how would you get, again, from his point of view, is how would you get away from that? Well, you'd overturn the whole system. You get rid of it entirely. And then possibly people would become more human. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And like I said, I think there's some valid points in that. If you want to tear down the whole system that we have, it hasn't done some of those things, and I acknowledge that. And it has some wrong motivations that tends to force us into thinking of profits and money probably more than we ought to, and the gaining of things. And but at the same time, at the same token, you have to save capital. But it has produced a lot of good in terms of. I mentioned this to you before we started talking. It's like, we don't think of this, but we lose perspective sometimes because we think maybe it's because we compare ourselves to our neighbor or to recent society. But the reality is, you and I, kind of middle Americans, we live a life in terms of luxury and ease in certain senses better than even the kings of old have ever lived. I mean, in this sense, and in terms like we lived in air-conditioned and heating house. Kings of old didn't have that. We have hot water, plumbing. You have, you probably have more food abundant than you realize. And that I haven't worried in any recent time, like, oh my gosh, me and my children might starve. That has not a concern on the top of my mind right now. Medicines and health. Technology so we can communicate with each other. Flying on an airplane, a king of old never dreamed of doing such a thing. In fact, I was at the other one, the flight I was taking. I was looking down. You're looking at the top, when you're above the clouds, and you're looking down all the clouds below you, and how it looks like an ocean, and they're kind of this wave motion, and that was phenomenal to me. I'm like, you know what? The king probably would have given all his wealth to experience something like that. So my point is, we may live it better than kings. We don't know it. We don't recognize it. And yet we still look around us and see this oppression and maybe it's because we're talking about that we still don't know how to live the good life, even though outwardly we have all this. Inwardly, in those quiet moments, we still feel a lack of something, and we're trying to find it.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think, to not overstate it, but I think to some degree, the movement and the ideology of Marxism as much as we want to contribute what you just said to capitalism, I think to some degree, Marxism has played a part in that, because it represented the laborer. So to some degree, let's just take it before the United States took on social programs, before the crash in the 1920s, only a few select people had access to education, let's say higher education.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after World War II that you essentially created a large middle class. Not that there wasn't a middle class, but a large middle class. Well, what was that? Well, it's because the government instituted a lot of programs that allowed what would be considered, the lower class to enter the realm of middle class, or at least have access to it. So I don't think you can discount that. I mean, if we were still operating like they were in the late 1800s in factories, I mean, even those people, they were on the factories. They didn't go anywhere. They were always going to be on the factories. Their sons and daughters were going to be in the factories, or just more or less the sons. So I don't think you can discount that it gave along with the unions, I think it gave the labor a voice, or at least a beacon of seeing something different in their plight. Is that, okay, if we come together, we may be able to get more money. We may be able to, as you mentioned, maybe we're able to be more mobile in a sense. And I think it at least made the capitalist aware that they had to take care of the worker to some degree. And I think it goes hand in hand. I don't think we mentioned this before, it wasn't binary. It wasn't as if the capitalist, the reason that we enjoy the luxuries we have right now is because of only the capitalist. Even some of the stuff we have right now, someone built that plane, and it wasn't the owner of the plane. Mm-hmm. So, I think, again, that's still being played out today.
Yeah.
We have to be aware of that. Well, when we go here, Jason, I'll finish up with this. So we have we're going to have two more discussions about Karl Marx. We're going to talk about the Communist Manifesto next time, and then we'll have a capstone like we have had for Plato and Galileo. So I'll just read an excerpt from Communist Manifesto, and Jason, you give your last thoughts about this discussion, and then we'll go from there. Okay? All right. So this is Communist Manifesto. So Communist Manifesto, he published in 1848. And quote, this is Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of the production, and with them the entire relations of society. During its rule of scarcely 100 years, it has created more massive and colossal productive forces than all the earlier generations taken together. Subjugation of the forces of nature to man, application of chemistry and industry to agriculture, steam navigation, railways, and the electric telegraph, clearing entire continents for cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured up out of the earth. What earlier age had even a presentiment of such gigantic social forces slumbering in the lap of socialized labor? So again, that's from Communist Manifesto, and we'll be discussing that extensively next time. Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead and give it.
All right, just I guess in closing thoughts here today is I do want to say one thing about Marx here in his life, dying in 1883, and there was a nice little a section on his family, and he always seemed to have at least some tender time with his family, and cared about his family, and had that, and would spend Sundays with them and walk with them, and so I guess that was still nice to see that he had some of those nice relationships in his life. And I guess closing out Marx and his thoughts, I guess I'm struck on two sides. One is on some of his firmness and his his intellect and the way he lived his life. And on the other side, like I said, I feel cautious in the application of all his ideas. And sometimes I look out at society, it doesn't seem like people are cautious about that or have thought through it all. And also this idea that things seem to be more complex as you dig into them and you look in, it's like, oh, there's more moving parts here than I thought. There's more moving parts within capitalism. Like, yeah, there are some downsides with that. And how do we work through that and keep society getting on this idea of progress is a challenge for all of us. And I guess I'm cautious in terms of, I don't think you tear down one of the best systems just to try to create something new, which you haven't even figured out yet. But we're just going to tear it down and try something new because I have this ideal in my mind of how it should be. It feels like you need to do more groundwork for that first, more development of that before you try such a thing. But it's been fascinating for me to study Karl Marx in these past several weeks and to have this discussion about him. And I'll just close with that he's phenomenal in terms of his influence and where it's at, since it's, we're over 100, coming up on 150 years here, and still has some interesting things to say about our society.